This course is presented to you free of charge by TTJ Tech Services of www.ttjtech.biz and by Stir It Up of www.stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, so that's STURITUP.com. TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up are pleased to offer this course to you, to the glory of God, and to the benefit of all those who listen. Voiceover in and out. This is exciting because we are going to talk about keyboards today. And I know some of you have been waiting for this. What we're doing here, as you know, is we really want you to be comfortable with the touchscreen first. And that's why we have waited to talk about keyboards until this late in the game, because we really feel that a person absolutely needs the foundation of learning to navigate by touchscreen. We have both, and really all of our team, we've witnessed folks who, have been taught from day one because they're nervous about the touchscreen, which I understand that. We certainly don't condemn anybody for being nervous, right? But what people have done in some cases is they've kind of said, well, okay, you're nervous about the touchscreen. You don't ever have to use it. Just get yourself a keyboard and learn the keyboard commands. Well, there's two big problems with that. The first problem is iOS is first and foremost a touchscreen device. So it will be harder. It will be less efficient to use a keyboard for everything, where you can reach out and touch the bottom left corner and then immediately the top right corner. You'll have to navigate in a different way to get to those places with the keyboard, so you don't appreciate the benefits of the touchscreen or the layout of the touchscreen if you haven't learned it. And the second thing is, it's really not, I know there are some small foldable keyboards, but it's really not practical to have a keyboard in your pocket all the time and pull it out every time you want to use your iPhone. So we, TTJ and on the team, we've really stressed learning the touchscreen first. But we do believe there are some cases where it makes sense to use a keyboard. If you're typing long documents, long emails, for example, and maybe some other things. And I personally don't use a keyboard with my iPhone. I do have keyboards with both of my iPads, but that's personal preference. Trainer Cliff here, we call him the keyboard king. He'll tell you about that. He's got keyboard in just about every room of the house. I think one in the car, maybe. But he'll fill you in here shortly. And what I want to do today is talk about how to use keyboards. But before we even get into that, I've asked Trainer Cliff if he would talk about some of the keyboards that he has used and what he recommends. Because one of the questions we get at first is, well, what keyboard should I use? What if I'm going out and buying a keyboard for my phone? What should I use? Now, if you want to learn about smart keyboards that connect to your iPad, you need to take our class in the spring, because we will talk in depth about smart keyboards and using keyboards with the iPad. So today we are talking strictly about Bluetooth keyboards that work with the iPhone. Some of them work with the iPad as well, or multiple devices. But we want to talk about that. Of course, Apple makes a Bluetooth keyboard, and then lots of third parties do. So Cliff, would you share with everybody what your recommendations are and the kinds of things to look for when they're shopping for keyboards and so on?
Well, when you're looking for a keyboard, first and foremost, you got to make sure that it's comfortable in your hands. 9 times out of 10, the keyboards that are sold today, in today's world anyway, are all designed for Bluetooth capability, number one, and two, you can use with iOS, meaning iPhone or iPad. I try to find a keyboard myself that can pair with 3 devices, because I have my phone. I don't have an iPad right now, but most Bluetooth keyboards can be paired with the Apple TV. which is not really necessary anymore because you can use your iPhone keyboard, which in a sense means you can use the Bluetooth keyboard to type usernames and passwords on the Apple TV if you want to. But we'll table that unless somebody asks a specific question about it. But the third device that I would use is my Mac, and I do this a lot while working. I'll switch between my Mac keyboard and my work, this is a bad word in this class, but my work PC keyboard, so I can text from my phone or my Mac while I'm working. But now everybody, and some people like the layout of the Apple Magic keyboard. And I have nothing against Apple Magic keyboard except the price. And it's a little spendy, yeah, because for the same price that you can get for an Apple Magic keyboard, the standard one, not the one with Touch ID or the extended one with Touch ID. We'll get into those differences in a minute. But that price usually these days is somewhere in the neighborhood of $89 or $99. And for that same price, I can get what me and Matt have called in the past partners, collaborators, whatever you want to call them. But Logitech seems to make keyboards specifically for Apple that has the iOS or Mac layout, for lack of a better term, and you can get a keyboard for that same price that pairs with 3 devices, that charges with a USB-C cable, and lasts for 6 months if you turn off the backlighting. That's my preference. Logitech, I don't even know what the last one is called. It's MX Mini and MX CTR, which stands for tactical or whatever. I don't use that one anymore because it was a little louder for my liking, but it's still a good keyboard. They do have some cheaper single-use keyboards or single pairing keyboards on Amazon for about, you can get them for as cheap as $9.99, $14.99, somewhere in there. I just bought a new one about 2 weeks ago for the car because the one that I had in the car was beat up. I mean, it was missing a few keys, and my wife said it just looked horrible, so she just ordered me a new one, and it's a brand new one in the glove compartment. And as Matt said, they call me the keyboard king, and I do have a keyboard pretty much in every room in the house except the kitchen. And I don't have one in there on purpose because when we're in the kitchen, we're eating dinner, nobody's allowed to have a phone at the table. It's supposed to go in a basket that sits on a table outside the dining room. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but I don't. So, but yeah, I actually literally have a keyboard in every room. I think I have 2 of them in my office here because I have one that I used to use, and then I got a better one that I like the better layout of. But that other one is still here because I just didn't give it away or get rid of it. So, but when you're looking for a keyboard, like I said, Logitech makes a good line. There's some people like the K480. I absolutely hate that keyboard for a few reasons. Number one, it's ancient. I think it came back in like 2015 or 16. It's on like Bluetooth 2.0, and we're on 5.1 something. And I guess the reason some people like it is because it can be powered or charged by solar charging by the sun. But I don't mind plugging my keyboard in every now and again. It's just faster, and it's, I got a pretty much a charging station in every room too, with USB-C or Lightning, depending on what kind of phone you have. I have a 15, so mine would be USB-C everything now, except for my AirPods. But like I said, you can get a cheap keyboard that are pretty relatively easy to pair for $14.99. If anybody's interested, just email me support@stirredup.com, and I'll send you the direct links to the keyboards that I like the best and ones that I've recommended in the past that I don't use anymore but still work pretty well. You have to be careful with some of these keyboards that you get though, because they are designed for a Windows layout. So make sure you pay attention to the description or go down in the Q&As and see if the question's been answered. If it hasn't, then ask the question yourself. But again, back to the Magic keyboards, because now we have Touch ID on the Macs now. So there are keyboards. I actually have the non-extended one, or the short version of it. I have a keyboard that has Touch ID on it, but I don't use it because it's only able to be paired with one device. And my Logitech can be paired with 3 devices. But that one does have Touch ID on it. They also have the Mac extended keyboard that is designed for the Mac, and and it has the numpad along with Touch ID. I've actually never seen that one. I had it, but never opened it and sent it back because I knew I had no use for it. I love the layout, don't get me wrong, but Logitech has just done such a great job of designing their keyboards to be laid out just like Apple's is. I mean, right down to where the function key is located on the extended one or the shorter one. The one thing I do like about the extended one is the function key is in a better place to reach it, because on the Apple one, it's in the 9 pack. On the Logitech one, it's actually in the bottom row between the option and command key, where you can reach it more easily if you have to use it to use your function keys, or the top row, whatever you want to call it. Because with the iOS devices, they have a top row on some keyboards, but they don't call them the function row. They call it something else because you're able to control your volume, your music playback, and to hide and unhide the keyboard. And in some instances, like with the keyboard that I have with Logitech, F1, 2, and 3 are designed to switch between the different devices you have paired, not to actually do functions unless you want it to be operated that way. And you can toggle that setting with the function key, or not the function key, but with the is it the function key? Let me look. See, I do it so often I just don't even think about it. Yes, it's the function key and the escape key. So if you hold down the FN key and hit the escape key, it will toggle you between the function row or the top row and the toggling of what device you are using at the time. And let me go back a little bit and tell you that when I first started using iOS or iPhone devices back in 2010, Bluetooth keyboards were not even supported. I had to wait a couple years. So I learned on an iOS touchscreen on how to navigate, swiping, double tapping, triple tapping, whatever the case may be, writing on texting from the touchscreen. It's not until 2012 or 13 that we got Bluetooth support and keyboards were enabled. And when they first came out, I really didn't care for it because the keyboards were so bulky and big back then. Now they make them as small to fit into somebody's purse or even your inside pocket. I even have one that's small enough to fit in my back pocket when I'm walking outside. But I don't do that anymore because I can dictate or use Siri. And who wants to just be in a store and sit down just to write a text message when you can do it on the touch screen? So let's make that clear. I was using the touch screen before I was using Bluetooth keyboards. But again, when you're looking for a keyboard, it's good to know what you like. Like for instance, another reason why I like the Logitech line and Apple's isn't like this is because their keys have little indentations for your fingers to just fall into place. Apple's Magic Keyboard, their keys are just flat. There's no indentation or anything. They're smooth. And again, nothing against Apple, but Logitech did a great job of either listening to the public, doing surveys, or whatever they did to find out what people like. Because this keyboard, I'm telling you, is perfect. The one that I have was released back in 2021, but it's still the most sold Logitech keyboard on Amazon and Logitech's website because people just love it. The backlighting, the pairing with 3 devices, the way your hands fit into place, the layout of the keyboard. I mean, people just rave about this keyboard. It has over 9,000 reviews. It has 4.8 out of 5 stars. You can't get much better than that. So there's my little spew on keyboards, Matt. I don't know what else you want me to add, but
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'll continue, and anytime you need to jump in, feel free. But no, I think you covered that very well, and thank you. And to second what Cliff said, Logitech is I don't agree with everything that Logitech does, but they do some great stuff, and they definitely do have this sort of what seems like a partnership. I don't know if Apple would really call it that, but they make a lot of stuff that is really specific. I don't know if Cliff mentioned this because I did have to step away for just a brief second there while he was talking at one point. But when you're looking at keyboards too, sometimes people will get these like, Amazon Basics things or like, generic third party kinds of stuff. And there's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but you do want to be careful about some keyboards are first and foremost designed for Windows. They'll still work with Apple, but they are designed for Windows, meaning that if you look at the keyboard.
And I did touch on that, and the biggest
Did you?
difference,
Okay.
yeah, but the biggest difference that I didn't mention is, and I'm glad you brought it back up, is the way that the keys are placed, because for
Right,
Windows
right.
there it's all in Windows, and then on for Mac it's Option and Command. But on if you're
Right.
using a Windows keyboard on a Mac, the Option and Command key are going to be reversed because it's laid out for Windows.
That's right. So it'll look different for people who see it. They'll see a Windows logo key, not, and these kinds of things. And you have to remember that the layout is reversed. We're going to go over the layout here in a couple minutes of what it normally is on a true Apple keyboard. It could be different for you depending on what you have. And again, that's okay. It will still work. But just something to be aware of also. Um, so that covers that aspect of it. And I want to go over now kind of the different types of commands that you can experience, and first and foremost, the layout. So I want to start with layout. Um, when we talk about Apple keyboards made by Apple, and a lot of the ones that are made for Apple, like most of the Logitechs and so on, the layout is pretty standard, very much like a PC keyboard, as far as the fact that it's QWERTY, and it has a row of numbers, so it's alphanumeric, right? But there is one big difference, and Trainer Cliff already mentioned this briefly, and I just go into a little bit more here. Apple devices, especially iOS and iPad OS devices, do not use what is traditionally known as F1 through F12. For those people who don't know what I'm talking about, you've never typed or something, on a Windows keyboard, there's a row of keys above the numbers, and it starts with F1. Well, it usually starts with escape or something, but then F1 all the way through F12, and then you sometimes have some other things. Apple has, for many, many years, even before the iPhone, they've always been focused on minimizing the number of keys on a keyboard. They've always felt like you don't need all the extra keys. The other companies, Windows, it was so gimmicky. I don't know if you remember this, Cliff, those keyboards for Windows that used to have all these, even above the F1 through F12, they'd have all these special, like you had a programmable, you could open Microsoft Word with one button, then you could open the Internet Explorer with another one, and it was just, and there was so many keys. And there's a famous story about Steve Jobs in between when he was fired from his own company there for a while, and then began working at Pixar and ended up back at Apple. But in between that time, he had gone over to a friend of his, to their house, and they must have still worked for Apple or something, and he was having dinner there or whatever, and they showed him a keyboard that Apple was working on, and it had all those extra keys, right? All kinds of extra stuff, and he was famously famously said that he said, this is a battleship, and he apparently took out a pocket knife, so the story goes, and began actually removing keys from the keyboard, and said, now this is what it should look like. And he said, see, I'm changing the world one keyboard at a time. Now that was in an authorized biography. Sometimes those things are not necessarily real, George Washington and the cherry tree and all that. But this was in an authorized biography. Supposedly it really happened. Take of it what you will. But basically, there's a lot of keys on some of these keyboards that people never use or almost never use. And, there's always other ways to do those things. So Apple has removed a lot of extra keys, and the most recent ones to sort of get to the chopping block are the F1 through F12. Now, if you are a Mac user, they do still have F1 through F12, although if you look at the keys on a Mac, they kind of have other icons on them. So even they aren't quite traditional F1 through F12. They can sort of be, but they also
they've actually never really had any real use. I mean, you can
no,
get to the
no,
mission control and the volume and the playback in iTunes or music
right,
app,
right,
but I mean, essentially, I don't even use them. So back when I
no,
used to
and
get mad about them not having a 12, the F1 through F12 keys, it was more of a, why did you do that, than I need these keys, because it's not like
right,
they really have any real use.
right. And of course, as you know, I was a big fan of the touch bar, which now is a thing of the past. I guess that a lot of professionals didn't like the touch bar. They wanted those actual physical tactile keys. So Apple went back to that. But we still have, I hardly use it. It's really Carson's, but we have a Mac with a touch bar still. And I really thought that was the way of the future. I was surprised that didn't really latch on. But anyway, that's a soapbox for another time, maybe. But nevertheless, on iPhone and iPad devices, especially, you could kind of say the Mac is in between, but on iOS and iPad OS, there really is no F1 through F12. And so, as Trainer Cliff said, there are keyboards which have that row of keys, but they are designed as special iOS shortcut keys. So they will do things like quickly take you to the home screen at the touch of a button, or quickly play and pause music or video playback, or go to the next or previous track. Sometimes there's a key that will toggle your do not disturb focus. Sometimes there's a key that will summon Siri or Spotlight or change the brightness, different types of things like that. So the top row is going to be different on an Apple keyboard if it exists at all. Okay, so that's one thing we want to talk about with layout. And there are some Apple keyboards that don't even have that row at all. Next thing we want to talk about with layout is the bottom row. Okay, and the bottom row on an Apple keyboard. Now, please understand there are two different possibilities here. Trainer Cliff already mentioned that. If you have an extended Apple keyboard that has a numeric keypad, your function or FN key is going to be in a different location. It's going to be in the 9-pack, which is like on the right-hand side. But your standard Apple keyboard, just the regular Magic keyboard with no numeric keypad, and a lot of other Bluetooth keyboards, they are not going to have that numpad. And their function key is going to be at the bottom left of the keyboard. So I'm going to go with that version because it's probably the more standard one. Just know that if you have the extended one, it's different, and it's where Cliff said. But in the basic one, your bottom left key is going to be called one of two things. It's either going to be called a function key or a globe key. The more recent Apple iterations have a globe key down there with a picture of a globe. And what that key does is it shows and hides the emojis on your screen, and it also allows you to toggle between
Assuming you haven't changed that in the settings area of the keyboard.
If you haven't changed that in the settings, that's right. Because it might be that you have 4 or 5 different keyboards installed. You can toggle through them and again, show your emojis. This is especially important with the iPad keyboards, smart keyboards and so on. But this also can act as a function key, which again, what that does is dependent upon the keyboard. It's dependent upon the app, I suppose. There's all sorts of different possibilities. So we're just going to call that the globe key or function key. And on the standard versions without the numpad, it's going to be the first key you'll encounter at the bottom left. The next one is going to be the control key. Okay. The one after the control key. Now, again, there's some variants here depending on what you get. And if you're using a Windows one, I'm going with the standard Apple version here. Okay. So globe or function, and then control. The next one is going to be option. And that's going to become very important in just a few minutes. Option, they call it. Okay. That is sort of equivalent. If you have to draw a comparison, I don't like drawing comparisons, but if you have to draw a comparison to Windows, that's actually sort of analogous to your Alt key. Okay. But it's called option on the Mac and on iOS and iPad OS. And then the one after that, which is just to the left of the space bar now, that's where we are, is the command key. So again, it's function or globe, control, option, command, space bar. Okay. And then on the right side, you're going to have another command and another option. No control on the right on most of these keyboards. Again, all of this is subject to change depending on what brand, what manufacturer, what layout you get. But I'm going with standard Apple here. Either if you buy the Apple one directly or one that is specifically made for Apple, that's what it's probably going to look like. So again, one more time on that bottom row: globe or function, control, option, command, spacebar, command, option. All right, that's your bottom row of keys, and that's going to be important in just a moment, and you'll see why.
This Apple extended control will be on the right side also, but I mean, let's be clear. Most people don't need the Apple extended keyboard unless you're in a work environment or you do a lot of things with numbers, because that's what the numpad is designed for. You can use it for different functions on the Mac with commanders, which I don't use. I only use my standard keyboard for commanders, which when you take my Mac class, you'll figure out what that is if you choose. But the numpad, I think, is going by the wayside these days. I mean, not very many people use them. The only reason I have one is in my work environment because I do have to do a little some dialing out to clients and customers, so it's easier to use it that way. But if I didn't have to do that, I would have the standard, as Matt calls it, keyboard without the numpad.
Right, right. Yeah, my wife used to like it. Jessica used to like the numpad back when we used desktop computers more. The first iMac that we ever had was back in 2009, and she wanted, that was her only request, was to get the one with the numpad, which at that time, when you got an Apple keyboard with a numpad, it had to be wired. So it just plugged into the USB on the back of the iMac. But that, of course, has all changed since then. But now we don't even use a desktop computer. She uses her iPhone, we use iPad, whatever, and I mean, she has a computer at school because she has to, but it's not typically what she's doing. So yeah, no numpad, if you're in a retail environment where you're inputting a lot of numbers or something like that, it might make sense. It's not the only way to do it, but it might be easier for you. So that's that personal preference stuff. So definitely an option, and it is wireless, just like the other one. And as Cliff mentioned, there are Apple keyboards with Touch ID, but they only work with the Mac. So if you get a Touch ID keyboard, you can't use Touch ID to log into or to authenticate to your iPhone or your iPhone apps or anything, right, Cliff? It's just Mac.
Correct. They made that very clear when they came out. I guess it was a year.
Yeah.
Was it a year ago? No, 2 years ago now.
A couple years, I think, at least. Yeah,
when the first M1 came out. So yeah, 2 years ago
right.
They made that clear when the Touch ID came out that it number one, it had to be Ventura and up, and number two, it only did work with Mac. I don't ever think they will, based on the fact that they really push for you to use the touchscreen. I doubt very seriously that they'll ever allow you to use Touch ID on an iPad or iPhone to unlock it. Number one, and number two, with everything going to USB-C, I think the Touch ID on iOS is probably going to be a thing of the past pretty soon.
So absolutely. So there you go. So it's specifically for Mac OS, and it's got to be an M1 or newer Macintosh. I don't think you can do it with an Intel Mac, and it has to be Ventura or newer. If you do have that and you do meet those qualifications, it is a nice option if you're going to use an external keyboard. It comes with some of the iMac models already. So that's the layout. Everything else is pretty standard. So let's talk about how we use these things. Now, as with most platforms, you're going to find that as a voiceover user, you have two separate and distinct sets of keyboard commands. One is specifically voiceover commands. They are commands that will only work when voiceover is turned on. And the other is standard iOS keyboard commands that will work for anybody, whether or not they use voiceover. The major difference between Apple and the other platforms is that we primarily, as a voiceover user, you will primarily use voiceover commands to navigate if you choose to navigate with the keyboard. Again, I don't prefer doing that at all because you can use the touchscreen even when the keyboard is connected, but it is possible to navigate with the keyboard, and you're going to use voiceover commands to do it. I think that Chrome OS on Google has, and Android has sort of adopted that same thing, but we won't get into that. But voiceover commands will be your primary means of navigation. And the reason for that, if you remember clear back to our first or second session, when we started talking about the fundamentals and the predictable patterns and the basics, we said that there is a voiceover cursor that moves. Instead of you just touching an item and it opens that item on the screen, you're now affecting a voiceover cursor, that rectangle that moves around when you swipe and so on, and it highlights a particular item. And so what you're doing with the keyboard is you're moving the voiceover cursor. So you need to use voiceover commands. Now, all voiceover commands will make use of what is known as the voiceover keys. And some people call them VO keys instead of voiceover. It's just quicker to say, quicker to write. And so if you're typing it or whatever, you hear people say, oh, it's VO keys. Well, that means voiceover. Okay, just so you know, they're not necessarily saying press the letter V and the letter O. They're saying press the VO keys. Well, what are the VO keys? Well, the VO keys, you have two choices. You can either use Control and Option held down together. We told you where those were, left-hand side. Control and Option held down together is your voiceover keys. Or you can use the caps lock as your VO key. Now, I'm kind of like Trainer Cliff, and I always say the caps lock reminds me too much of that other platform, So when I started, as when Cliff started, you didn't have caps lock as an option. It was only Control and Option that were your voiceover keys. And I've seen one or two situations where caps lock doesn't necessarily work for some reason. I don't know if that's changed now, but it used to be. So I always say Control and Option. It's more consistent, I think. Excuse me. And I just like it better. But some people will adamantly disagree, and that's fine. Personal preference. And you can change that under settings. Now, Cliff, remind me or correct me if I'm wrong, because of course I don't really mess with this too much, but do they now have, is it the default now on iOS that you can use either one, Control and Option or caps lock, or is that not the default setting?
Yeah, you can use either one. It's either or. You can have them both set to be work as the default. I mean, like you, I use the voiceover keys, but the
control,
lock,
yeah. Right. So you can use either, but that's in your keyboard settings. You can change that, or in your I guess it's in your voiceover settings actually, under keyboards there. But basically, you can press and hold Control and Option or caps lock, and whatever other keys it tells you. So if you're reading something and it says press VO right arrow, again, that's not telling you to press the letters V and O. It's telling you to press Control Option right arrow or caps lock right arrow. Okay, they'll shorten it up like that because it's easier to read and write and type and everything, and to say, really. So they'll say press VO space. That means press Control Option space bar or caps lock space bar. All right, we're going to stick with Control and Option just so I don't have to repeat that every time like that. Okay, but know that it's interchangeable. So to navigate, there's going to be the use of the left and right arrow keys with the VO keys. You'll press VO right arrow. That's the equivalent of swiping right. You'll press VO left arrow. That's the equivalent of swiping left. You'll press VO space. That's the equivalent of double tapping. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the voiceover commands. Why not? Am I expecting you to just flounder around and discover them? Actually, there's something much better than any of that, which is that every voiceover keyboard command can be found in a helpful little onboard set of instructions right on your device. And that is, again, something we talked about in the very early sessions. We went to settings. You might remember this. You go to accessibility. You go to voiceover. And you go to commands. Now, under commands, you'll see all. You'll see touch gestures. Guess what? You'll see keyboard commands. You can go through that and you can read every voiceover keyboard command that there is for your iPhone or iPad. And if there are ones that are empty that don't have an assignment, you can actually assign functions to them. Okay. But just know the basics are using the voiceover VO keys in combination with the arrows, left and right to move, spacebar to double tap. VO up and VO down are like moving the rotor, I think, but actually I think you got to, I think that's right. There is VOH to go home. Another very common one is the VO dash or VO hyphen, which is like your magic tap. There are other useful ones, but again, I'm not going to just sit here and recite them to you. Number one, I don't know them all because I don't use them that frequently. I never use them on iPhone and I rarely use them on iPad. I mostly just use the keyboard on the iPad to type. But so number one, I don't even think I could recite all of them because I'd get something wrong because I don't do it. I don't know them. But number two, because the most current, most up-to-date, most thorough way to learn them is from where I just told you, under settings, accessibility, voiceover, commands. And there you can read every one that there is. You can see what the options are. But basically, the VO keys, control and option, in combination with the arrows and the spacebar, will do most of what you want 9 times out of 10. There are some other ones. What's the long press on iOS, Cliff? Is it VO Shift M still?
It sure is. And then
Okay.
also, not only can they go into settings, general or not general, accessibility, keyboards, then in commands, they can also turn on VO help and just push key combinations and it'll tell you what they do also.
Right. And so you can get your keyboard help, which is VOK, Control Option K. And what that'll do is it'll turn on a special mode, which it's called keyboard help. And anything you press, it will announce what it does. It will announce what key it is, and it will not affect anything else. And then to turn it off, you just do VOK a second time. Now, if you press voiceover commands while that keyboard help system is on, as Trainer Cliff said, it will tell you exactly what it does. So that's a useful way to practice as well. Now, the other type of keyboard commands that there are the non-voiceover commands, the standard iOS shortcuts that work for everybody, regardless of whether they use voiceover. And these are going to be sort of dependent upon the app that you're in. There are some very common ones. So, for example, and you'll notice the difference here between this and Windows or Android. It's not the control key, it's the command key with a lot of these. So, like, for example, Command C copies, right? Command C is to copy your, text to the clipboard or whatever. Command V, as in Victor, to paste. Command Z, as in zebra, to undo. Command B, as in boy, for bold. Command I for italic. You get these ideas, okay? Very similar to other platforms. And most apps, now I cannot say all, but most apps have a reference section if you open the app. Like, for example, if you go to Apple Pages and you go to the Pages Help, which is found under the More button, and you can choose Pages Help. There's also a Pages User Guide on Apple Support, the website, or Apple Books. There's all kinds of ways to find it, right? But they do have an onboard help system. And if you go to Pages Help, they're going to have a section on keyboard commands. So again, you can learn the keyboard commands that are specific to the app you're using. But there are some standard ones, like I just told you, Command C to copy, Command V to paste, those kinds of things. These are going to work with or without voiceover being turned on, and they're very useful. So check your app instructions. And the one other thing I do want to talk about with those non-voiceover commands is I want to talk about moving around and editing within a text field, because that is also different. And when you are a voiceover user, there's one more thing we have to talk about with that, and that is something called Quick Nav. Now, earlier I told you that anytime you want to move around with VoiceOver and navigate with VoiceOver, you're using VoiceOver commands. I also went ahead and told you that all VoiceOver commands have Control and Option or Caps Lock, VO keys with them, okay? But what if you need to move around with one-handed navigation for some reason and you don't want to hold Control and Option all the time? Well, that's where QuickNav comes in. Apple has designed a feature called QuickNav. Again, this is VoiceOver specific now, okay? If you're a VoiceOver user. They've designed a feature for VoiceOver called QuickNav that allows you to navigate without holding down those Control and Option or Caps Lock keys. Instead, you just press the left arrow to go left, the right arrow to go right. What do you press to double tap instead of VO space? Is it the up and down arrows together, or is there a way to do that? Trainer Cliff might have had to
I'm
mute
sorry, what
there.
was the question?
Oh, if you're using quick nav, what do you press to do the equivalent of VO space? Is there a quick nav equivalent like the up and down together or
Yeah,
something?
that's exactly what it is, up and down together.
Okay. And then you can even use the like up and right arrow or down and left to move the rotor.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
and then the up and down by themselves will change the rotor by that setting or what have you. So
Correct.
this is quick nav,
And then
and
when
that
you're
means
not in the rotor setting or rotor navigation, for lack of a better term, using the up or down arrow by itself will, navigate you to the. If you're on the page picker, it'll take you up to the library or to other pages, or it'll put you in edit mode so you can move apps around and stuff too.
oh, okay, all right. So that's good to know too. So this is quick nav, and it is on by default. But here's what happens that's really cool. If you go to an edit field, so you're typing in the messages app and you're in a conversation and you decide you want to reply to a message, and so you go to the edit field and double tap or VO space or up and down arrows together, however you choose to do it. All of a sudden, you're going to hear a little noise, a little like a descending tones, basically, and it's indicating that QuickNav has turned off. This happens by default in iOS as soon as you open an edit field or enter an edit field. When you get into that edit field, it automatically turns off QuickNav. And then when you leave the edit field, it should automatically turn QuickNav back on. Now, the reason that it does this is because you need the arrow keys in the edit field to be able to move around and navigate line by line and character by character and so on, so that you can properly edit. And I'll tell you specifically what those commands are in a moment, but just know that you need those arrows for a different reason. And so that's why QuickNav automatically turns off when you get into an edit field. And again, it should automatically turn back on when you leave the edit field as well. Now, if you ever think or feel that they're not in sync for some reason and QuickNav is not on when it should be or vice versa, you can manually turn it off and on by pressing the left and right arrow keys together at the same time, and that'll make a little rising or descending tone sound, just depending on whether it's turning it off or on. You can change that too under your voiceover settings, and you can actually have spoken announcements that says quick nav on or quick nav off, or do nothing if you want, even, I think. But basically, that's how you do it manually. But know that it should by default turn quick nav off when you enter into an edit field, and turn it back on when you leave an edit field. Now, while you're in the edit field, messages app, mail app, notes, pages, freeform, anywhere that each Safari web field, anywhere that you can edit text, I want to give you some commands. And if you're taking notes, these would be good ones to write down or remember, because they're not as easy to locate, if I remember correctly. I remember having to do some digging to find a place where these were presented, but they are useful. So very simple. All right, to move character by character in an edit field, it's the left and right arrows, one at a time. Left arrow moves you to the previous character. Right arrow moves you to the next character. I just want to give you a friendly reminder that the same rules apply as when we were moving on screen character by character and word by word, meaning that you're going to hear the character you pass over or the word that you pass over. Remember how we did that whole demonstration? We had Cliff and Sarah and Lynn, sitting at a table or a counter or whatever, and we moved, between them and walked to each person. And I said who I was in front of, and I'll remember back to that because it is exactly the same, only you're doing it with the keyboard now instead of the navigating on screen. So again, left arrow moves to the previous character, right arrow moves to the next character. All right, let's talk about moving word by word. Add the option key. Remember, on the left side, it's globe or function if you have it there at the bottom, and then control, and then option. So option right arrow moves to the next word. Option left arrow moves to the previous word. And again, this is when we are in an edit field. All right, line by line. Up arrow moves to the previous line. Down arrow moves to the next line. Doesn't get much simpler than that, right? Now, we also can add the command key to some of these things. So if we want to press Command left arrow, it moves to the beginning of a line. Command right arrow moves to the end of the line. And then finally, if we want to move to the very top of a document or an edit field, the very beginning of an edit field or the very end or bottom of an edit field, that's Command up arrow to move to the beginning and Command down arrow to move to the end. The other one that I want to give you is, what if you want to select some text as you're moving? So I need to select 5 words. We already know that I can move word by word with Option right arrow or Option left arrow. But what if we want to select? Well, all we do is we very simply add the Shift key. So any of those arrow-based navigational commands that I gave you just a moment ago, if you simply add Shift, you are now selecting as you're moving. So if I press Shift right arrow, I'm selecting by character. Shift Option right arrow, I'm selecting by word, and you get the idea. And if I select too much, I just go back. Shift Option left arrow or what have you. Okay. I think, and I need to verify this with Trainer Cliff because I don't usually, I think there is a page up and page down too. If you, do you add the function key? How do you do, like if you want to select more than just
It's the
select
Option key, and it depends on what app you're in. So if you're
Okay.
just in a folder, I think you can do Option right and left arrow to go left and right pages or back and forth. But in the Pages app, I think it's the up and down arrow with the Option key. I don't do it. I don't use the keyboard that often with my phone, like I said, I don't have an iPad right now, so I don't really remember. But I think that's how it goes. And there's another command that the settings, accessibility, keyboard, and commands is not going to give you, and that's to go to the top of like if you want to go to the top of your screen, you use Control and the up arrow. If you want to go to the bottom of your screen, like into the dock area and skip over everything else, it's Control down area. And it works the same as if you're in a text message. Like me and Matt, our conversation probably goes back 2 years. So if I want to go to the bottom of that conversation, I do Control down arrow. And if I want to go to the very top of what's displayed, not the top of the conversation, because it's not going to do that. But if I want to go to the top of what's displayed, I would do Control up arrow. And in order to, get to previous conversations, like if I wanted to go back to last July or May, I would have to either use the vertical splitter, or I could use the left or right arrow with the Option key to turn pages in that conversation.
Absolutely. And to be clear, what he's talking about is different from the edit field. When you're in the edit field, if you want to go to the beginning, it's Command up arrow and the end is Command down arrow. But we're talking about now not edit fields, just like, again, what the top of what is visibly displayed, Control up, and the bottom is Control down. So there's some different commands there. And most of those you can find in your settings or in the apps, but a couple of them that we wanted to give you that are not as easy to find, but they are.
I don't know if you mentioned this one
valid.
either. It's a common one, but the VOM to go to the status bar.
Oh, yeah, that is a good one because that'll take you to where you can read the time and the battery percentage and all that, Wi-Fi. And how do you get out of that? Do you do VOM again then, or escape, or what do you do there?
Yeah, you can either do VOM or you can just touch anywhere on the screen and it'll go back to the main.
Oh, just right. Yep. Okay. All right. All right. So let's see. That's actually a good bit of what I wanted to cover on this. We are going to cover in future sessions, for those who are wondering, we're going to do a little bit with Braille and handwriting and Braille screen input and some of these different things, Braille displays. We are going to do some of that as well, but not today. But I think really, and let me check and see if Trainer Sarah is here yet. I know that she they were doing some work in her area on the internet, so I don't know if she's in with us yet or not, but I'll check. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Cliff, about keyboards?
The only other thing I would probably add is when you're navigating on Safari, there is the single key letter navigation command that you can turn on and off, which is VO or the voiceover keys and the letter Q. So you can turn it on and off that way as a toggle. So you just turn it on and off that way. And that's good to use if you want to navigate by button, checkbox, link, heading, table, or region. But if you know you're going to a website just to fill out a form, it's good to have those that off, because even if you VO spacebar in the edit field with that on, it's still gonna think you're doing single letter navigation. So you want to turn that off when you're filling out a form or navigating on Safari with something that has a lot of edit fields. But other than
Yeah,
that, I think that pretty much covers it.
and that's something we really didn't talk about. That's another level of once QuickNav is on that single letter navigation, which allows you to just press like H to go to the heading and so forth. Because normally, and again, you can find this in your voiceover command settings, but normally when you're on a website or anywhere really, there are some shortcut keys. Like if you want to move by heading, you do VO command H to go to the next heading, or VO command shift H to go to the previous heading. So in other words, that's like control option command H and then control option command shift H. And there are other ones besides heading, and so what happens then is that if you turn on QuickNav and you do, what is it, VOQ, turns on the single letter navigation, right? And that gives you the ability then to just press like H, shift H, whatever, to move heading by heading, to not have to add all those other keys in there as well. But again, as Trainer Cliff said, when you're in an edit field, make sure you turn that off.
The keyboard, is there one that sometimes require you to replace the battery on your own, or are
That
those
depends on the keyboard that
special
you.
ones?
That's depends on which one you buy. The Logitech and Magic keyboards are powered or charged by USB-C now, so no, you never have to replace those batteries. But if you get one like I got off of Amazon off of the car, those require two AAA batteries. But the one that I just had that was beat up and that I now use in the living room, which is where I very rarely am, so that's why I kept it for that purpose. I've had those batteries in there for 4 years and never had to replace them.
Does does it come with the charging brick, or do you have to supply your own
You have to supply your
brick
own,
for the? Oh, okay. Thank you.
but it does come with the cable. But the brick you do have to supply yourself.
Okay.
And really, like if you have one of your, if you get an Apple Magic keyboard, which is gonna, any of your existing cables where you have a lightning cable connected, or some of them will use whatever, but that's, you can use the same thing. So
quick question on I have a MX Keys Advanced keyboard I'm going to be dusting off. And where is the dictate button on that, please? Because I'd like to be able to dictate some and then use
dictation
my
button is normally used with, is it Control, Matt?
I think that it is. I've seen that, but how do you do
Yeah,
that?
I think you hit the control key twice to dictate.
Twice, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
then when you're done dictating, you hit it again, twice.
Right.
One thing I use my keyboard for is, with the iPhone, is if I'm out and about and I want to enter passwords, I like to do it with the keyboard. That way nobody hears them, and I don't have to.
That is a good point, because even when you do use your on-screen keyboard for your password, VoiceOver does speak it out loud. So if you do use your keyboard,
Right.
especially like for me, because with my iPhone, I don't just use a 6-digit passcode. I actually use an alphanumeric password. And anybody who else wants to set that up, settings, passwords, and Face ID, of course, you'll have to enter your current password. You can go to password options and swipe password says 6-digit or 4-digit numeric password, and it'll say more options, and it'll give you the option to set up a password that has letters and numbers in it, and that's what I use. Make my phone more secure.
Yeah.
If you want to use autofill, the keyboard has to be off, because that keyboard where you can reach above the IO and the U is not going to appear unless the keyboard is off,
Yes.
not allowing you to find the autofill or password fill-in option if you have that keyboard on.
God bless you. Thanks for joining today. And we will see you for lab on Wednesday or help session tomorrow. We got a help session Tuesdays with TTJ tomorrow at 2 Eastern. Take care, everybody.
We'd like to thank you again for joining Voiceover In&Out 2023. Didn't get your question answered? Need additional training? Send us an email at support@ttjtech.biz or support@stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with the U. That's STURITUP.com. I'm Trainer Cliff. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time. God bless.